Welcome back, everybody. Let's get a sense of where the market's heading in 2013. Joining us right now is Jim O'Neill, Goldman Sachs Asset Management Chairman. And Jim, it's great to see you this morning.
Nice to see you guys. How are you doing?
We're doing pretty good. I take it you're having an easier start to the week than you did last week after the Rolling Stones concert. Kept you out late on Sunday?
I think I'm still... I was thinking when you were saying what's keeping you up at night. Last week, plenty, but this week, not quite so much.
Well, let's talk about the fiscal cliff. Is that worrying you at all? The calendar is now December 3rd, and it does not look like these two sides are any closer to reaching any sort of an agreement. If this is an issue that we actually don't find a solution to the fiscal cliff, we go over the edge, what's it going to mean for the global markets?
I was just listening and watching to your previous discussion. I don't, you know, you guys are at a minimum lucky that the dollar is still such a reserve currency. When you compare the luxury that it seems the markets are giving Washington compared to the complete opposite with a lot of these Club Med countries, the contrast is startling. But what's really in my head this morning is I detect more and more longer-term investors and you know, the cautious long-only ones who are being influenced by this and starting to think, you know what, Europe has dealt with some of its long-term issues, even though the economies are weak, and given the relative returns and value on offer in markets, I detect the first signs of people shifting more towards Europe from the US, because you look and listen to the kind of thing you guys were just discussing, and you know, it's like a kind of never-ending game in Washington. It's a bit farcical, really.
So you think we're actually in a situation where the talk in Washington has turned much more dangerous and actually driving investors away?
Well, I think you know, I personally have assumed for a few weeks that, you know, Washington likes its theatre, and this nonsense will go on right to the wire. And if there's not a deal, no doubt they'll come up and tell us there'll be a deal 2 weeks later. But I think at the core of it, you know, the reality is, particularly in democracies and where governments are returned with very fragile majorities like Obama has and this divided Congress, it isn't easy to solve fiscal problems, as we know from many other parts of the world. And one of the few things I've learned in 31 years of being in the markets is never let a crisis go to waste, and it's usually when markets put governments under the cosh, that's when they start to deal with things. And even if there is a deal, it's not clear to me that it's going to be anything of major substance. But all that being said, it has to be seen against the background of what's going on in the world economy. And the other interesting thing this morning is that the PMIs we've had in China and Europe are definitely showing a flavour of a shift for the better, albeit very modest and gradual.
Jim, this is Dave Walker. You and I both know that the true numbers with regard to sovereign finances in Europe and the U.S. are a lot worse than advertised. And that while the U.S. faces a fiscal cliff, which hopefully we can avoid, Europe faces a financial cliff because the U.S. has restructured its financial institutions and Europe has not. What about the practical implications of that fact?
Well, I think, I mean, that is a big ongoing dilemma, but I think the thing that people are understandably relieved about, and here the Super Mario moment in the summer has played a role, that this spiral between sovereigns and the health of banks appears, famous last words, to have been broken a bit in Europe. And that is definitely, you know, so the absolute worst appears to have been taken out of the equation. But, you know, obviously Europe is years behind the US in terms of reforming its private sector financial system, and that does continue to be an issue going forward. But I quickly add, linked to what I said before, I know investors that are looking at investing in European financials that haven't dreamt of it for years, and that's a mood that's grown in the past couple of weeks.
Jim, it's Steve McMahon. Would you say the global markets are anticipating that America will go over the cliff, or do you think the global markets are anticipating that this will be resolved somehow?
I think the markets are assuming that even if there is some shift over the cliff, it will be temporary and some kind of deal will be cobbled together before the inauguration, is my best summary of it, and that is certainly what I'm assuming. And I think markets are thinking it's not going to be anything dramatic and substantial.
Well, part of the problem is...
But I think people expect some kind of deal.
Part of the problem is people need to look at the rules in the Senate. Unless the Senate changes their rules, if you want to reverse tax increases or spending cuts, you have to have 60 votes. That's what it takes in the Senate. And nobody has close to 60 votes. That's why I think it's really, really important that we try to avoid this avoid the cliff before the end of the year, if at all possible.
Yeah, you could be right, but as I said earlier, I mean, from 40,000 feet, it's kind of, if you look at the election outcome and the closeness of the control for the Republicans and the Democrats, you know, it's understandable it's tricky, because the basic problem you've got is taxes are too low for the given level of spending, so one or the other has to give quite a bit, or both have to give a little, and it's not easy to do that in such a divided electorate, and even ignoring the games that are going on in Washington, it's not easy.
Well, and we're dealing with a dysfunctional democracy, which we'll have to deal with at some point.
Yeah, but Jim, you guys are still envious over there. I mean, you cobble together these alliances between 14 different parties. You don't know what you have half the time over in the UK, and then UK looks good compared to the rest of Europe and Asia. So.
Well, maybe that's another thing that the US is in the early stages of learning here. Many of these European countries, of course, have dealt with coalition governments as the norm for a long, long time. Take Germany, one of the stronger, at least at the moment, parts of Europe. Complex coalitions are a fact of life there, and maybe that's what's the slow dawning challenge on top of the underlying financial realities that the US has got to start thinking about a bit more.
Yeah,
it all seems a bit new for the US, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, we are new. We're still a new country, Jim.
Everything's relative.
That's right.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jim, thank you very much.
I would say,
go ahead.
I think the PMI this afternoon will be very interesting to see what part of any of this is influencing sentiment against the background of stronger PMIs around the rest of the world today. Because it looks like the world's gone into Q4 stronger than it was in Q3.
All right, perfect. Jim, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll talk to you again soon.